My name is Karen Klein.
And Karen, when were you appointed a magistrate judge?
In January 1985.
Where were you appointed?
In the District of North Dakota, and I served in the courthouse in Fargo primarily, but when I was appointed, I was the first magistrate judge in the district who had more than very minimal criminal preliminary duties. And so I covered the entire district, which meant I went to 4 different court locations that were spread widely throughout the state.
Were you the first full-time magistrate judge in that district?
I was. Initially, I started out as a half-time magistrate judge. The court had requested the position. They'd requested a full-time position, and unfortunately only got authorization for a half-time position. But in less than a year, it was upgraded to full-time. So I served just a few months as a part-time or half-time magistrate judge. And I maintained my law practice because I wasn't sure if I'd like being a judge. So and that was in the days before the internet, before email. So I always seemed to be in the wrong office at the wrong time. When I was in my law office, things would happen at the court and I'd have to run over, and vice versa.
You had to be pretty young when you were appointed.
I was 34 when I was selected, and I had just turned 35 when I assumed my duties. And I had not really thought about becoming a judge. You know, I served as a law clerk to the chief federal district judge right out of law school, and that was a 2-year term. And then I went and practiced law for 4 or 5 years. And one day I got a phone call from the judge's judicial assistant, and she said, the court has gotten approval for the creation of a magistrate judge position, and Judge Benson, the judge I'd clerked for, would like you to apply. Well, he was my mentor, so what do you do? Your mentor asks you to apply, you do. So I did, and of course, lo and behold, I got the position. And I didn't realize how young I was until I looked back, maybe 10, 15 years later, and thought, what were they thinking, appointing someone so inexperienced? But you know, it was probably good that I didn't realize what the position really entailed or how young I was. I just got in there and started working.
So you were young, brand new position, you're the only magistrate judge. How did you handle that or adjust? What'd you do?
Well, the great thing about it was, since there hadn't been a predecessor, the judges just told me to figure out what my authority was and do as much as I could do. And so I was able to really shape that position in the way I wanted it to be. So because I was so young, and I was the first female judge that the federal court had ever had, and one of the very first in the state, including all levels of the state system. So the first couple of years, I didn't get many consent cases. So I did a lot of pre-trial case management, and to try to get the cases moving, I started setting settlement conferences. Now, I'd never handled a mediation before. I'd never even attended one as a lawyer. So I just started trying this and trying that, and maybe it was at least 10 years before I got any sort of training through the federal judiciary on how to conduct mediation. And I was surprised to find it was pretty reaffirming that I'd sort of figured it out by myself.
Well, you've been a pillar in training others to be mediators. Do you feel that because you had to create it from whole cloth, you were able to create education for others?
I think so. I think we learn best when we learn from our mistakes rather than just being told what to do. And my original career plan was to be a teacher. And I had some difficulty finding a position that I wanted in my field. So I decided, I worked for a couple of years in very unsatisfying jobs. And I decided to join the VISTA program, which is like the Domestic Peace Corps. So I served in that for a while and then went back to law school. But I found after serving as a judge for a few years that there were opportunities to combine my love for teaching with my love for the judiciary. And so that led to my teaching new judges and also teaching mediation to more experienced judges. And I've really enjoyed that aspect of my work.
I've always been unbelievably impressed with your commitment to the magistrate judge system on two fronts, from your organizational involvement and also your educational endeavors to teach colleagues, and then broadening that out to the international scene. Why did you choose to get involved in first organizational and then the whole education, which you then evolved into international?
Thank you.
That's a long question.
It is a long question, but the court in which I served is really small. There were 2 district judges, and then there was me, the only magistrate judge, and ultimately we got a second magistrate judge position that was half-time initially, and then it became full-time. So there were 2 full-time positions. The caseload wasn't very heavy by the time we had a second full-time magistrate judge, and that freed me up to do some other things. I'm somebody who likes to stay busy. I like to stay challenged, and I really felt that, you know, with such a small court, I wanted to broaden my horizons. And so I've been very fortunate. There were opportunities that presented themselves. The Federal Judicial Center asked me to assist with some of their judicial education programs, and I really enjoyed it, and they were appreciative of my work and have kept asking me to do it. I had the opportunity to serve on the Magistrate Judges Committee of the Judicial Conference, and from that I decided I wanted to get involved in the Judges Association because I saw how important the association was to the development of the magistrate judges system and advocating on behalf of magistrate judges. So there was a time when I was involved with FJC, with the Magistrate Judges Committee, and with the FMJA all at the same time. And it was challenging and really very exciting.
And you were traveling.
And I was traveling
A lot.
for all of those things. I was.
You've served on a lot of committees for the courts nationally. I know you've mentioned, I think, 3, but there were more.
The last 6 years that I was a judge, I served on the IT committee of the Judicial Conference as well. And then outside of the judiciary, the ABA Rule of Law Initiative found me through the Federal Judicial Center and asked me to do some consulting and some teaching with judiciaries in other countries. And so I've been to a dozen or more countries. With the ABA, it's been mostly in the Middle East. I've been to Jordan, Morocco, Algeria, Egypt, Oman, the Emirates. And I've also done programs in Malaysia and in India. Those involve mediation. And then I've done some for the Eastern EU in Poland.
You've told us how you got involved in the international. How do you feel about teaching internationally, and do you feel that you've been able to contribute to the judicial systems in those countries based on your education?
I do. In addition to teaching mediation in several of those countries, I worked in Morocco and Jordan with developing their codes of judicial conduct. They didn't have them in their countries. And the judges at first, they were very accepting of me as a judge from the United States. and they are very respectful of our judiciary. But they didn't see a need for having a code of judicial conduct. They felt that somehow adopting a conduct code reflected poorly on them, that they were admitting that they had some problems ethically. And so I had some really interesting and challenging meetings with groups of these of judges. And I tried to get them to see that having a code of conduct was not a criticism of them, but rather a protection that would help them distance themselves from inappropriate approaches made by members of the public who didn't understand the need for judges to be impartial. And watching that evolution from their resistance to their adoption of a code of conduct, and then I conducted training of trainer programs for the judges in both Jordan and Morocco to teach those judges to conduct their own education programs for their colleagues on the issue of judicial ethics.
So it sounds like you were taking your mediation skills that you created and also used them in your international education programs. Would you say that's true?
It's true. I used my teaching skills and my mediation skills. So initially I used the mediation skills to try to bring them around to an attitude of embracing a code of judicial conduct rather than resisting it. And then I used my teaching skills to help them prepare to bring their colleagues to have a positive attitude about it as well.
So you've had many varied roles while you were a magistrate judge. How long did you serve?
I retired in January 2015, the same week that I reached 30 years on the bench. And I loved every day that I served as a magistrate judge, but I felt after 30 years it was time to do something different. But I still felt like a 20-year-old, and I wasn't ready to quit working. So I decided, and my court didn't really need me at the time as a recall judge, and I didn't want to recall without staff, so I decided to start a mediation practice. I was the first judge in my state, federal or state, to do any sort of mediation. And so I had developed a reputation throughout the state and regionally as a mediator. And so I was really fortunate that when I set up my own little Klein mediation business, that people started calling me right away. And it's been a great deal of fun. There are times when I'm too busy with it. There are times when it's just right. But all in all, it's been really a thrill. And it's been a real affirmation for me that people have valued the settlement work that I've done over the years.
And how did the years that you were a magistrate judge, and certainly the years that you were teaching internationally, how did those prepare you for what you're doing now?
You know, when I first started doing mediation in the court, it was simply a way of moving cases and trying something new that would help get the caseload under control. And I never imagined that I would build a career around mediation at a later time. But of all the duties I had as a magistrate judge, and I enjoyed, the criminal caseload. I enjoyed civil trials. I enjoyed some of the really challenging motions. But I didn't enjoy any of it as much as I enjoyed mediation and the satisfaction of bringing people around to resolution of their problem and feeling a great sense of relief that they could put this dispute behind them and move on with their lives. And particularly once I started teaching mediation to my colleagues and really reflecting on what an important service we were providing to the litigants and to the bar, that I really decided that's how I want to spend my post-judicial career.
So it sounds like your passion is what you're doing right now, mediating, helping other people. How about your passion for education? Have you been able to take that into your retirement from the bench?
I have. Not in all of the ways that I'd like to, but there's still plenty of time ahead. The Federal Judicial Center has kindly asked me to continue to teach at a number of their programs for magistrate judges. So right now we're at a national workshop for magistrate judges, and I am on the faculty as part of a panel on ethics in settlement. Later this fall, I will teach at the Phase 2 orientation program for new magistrate judges. And I've always loved teaching new judges because it just really brings home to me how, when you see the enthusiasm of the new judges and how they're learning the aspects of the position of magistrate judge, how important the work we do as judges is, and what a thrill it is to be a magistrate judge, and what a wonderful position it really is. And then also later this fall, I'm going to serve on the faculty of the Mediation Skills Workshop that the Federal Judicial Center puts on for district judges, magistrate judges, and bankruptcy judges. But when my mediation practice, when I start to wind that down a little bit so that I have a little more free time on my hands, I would like to spend some time tutoring learning challenged, learning disabled high school students. My son had a learning challenge. He's a very bright young man. He's a civil engineer, a hydrology engineer. But it took a lot of work to get him there that the school system couldn't really provide for him on a one-on-one basis, which he needed. And so I would like to provide that help to someone else's children, maybe a parent who can't help their child in the same way that I did. And so that is a passion that I have that I haven't yet been able to fulfill, but I'm looking forward to doing it.
I have a feeling you will.
I think I will.
The job of magistrate judge and the whole magistrate judge system has really evolved over the years that you've been a magistrate judge. How do you see your involvement contributing to that evolution?
Well, I think each of us has an opportunity to grow the system as we grow ourselves. So I think the opportunity I had to really shape my position in my district and try new things that were maybe considered at that point at the outer reaches of the authority of a magistrate judge really helped because districts learn from one another. My service on the Magistrate Judges Committee was from, I believe, 1992 to 98. And that was at a time of tremendous growth in not only the numbers of magistrate judges, but also in the authority of magistrate judges. There was long-range planning going on. That was also just following the time of the Civil Justice Reform Act when we were trying out new things. During my time on the Magistrate Judges Committee, there was legislation to authorize contempt authority for magistrate judges. And even though, fortunately, we don't have to use it very often, it's very important to have it. It's a recognition that we are real judges. And if there's misbehavior that takes place before us, it doesn't have to be decided by another judge, that we have some control over the proceedings that we preside over. Also, the growth in the consent trials by magistrate judges has just been phenomenal since those days. And my district was one of those that put magistrate judges on the wheel a few years before I retired, so that magistrate judges were given a significant share of the assignments of civil cases, and the parties were strongly encouraged to consent. And I think by the work I did in developing the magistrate judge position in my district, the lawyers really came to respect the position and have become very willing to consent to try their cases before the magistrate judges.
Do you feel that because of your unique circumstances of being the first magistrate judge in a brand new position at a time when you could create the job for yourself, perhaps assisted you to have more effect on contributing to the evolution of the magistrate judge system than perhaps someone who's from a big court, as I am, where the court, the district judges pretty much dictate what the magistrate judge's role will be. Am I making sense?
Absolutely, and there's certainly room in large districts for innovation as well, but I think it's a lot easier when you operate in a very small court where there are very few judges, and it's easier to be collegial. And particularly when I was the only magistrate judge, I had the opportunity to try new things without clearing it with a group of colleagues and getting buy-in from other magistrate judges and from a large cadre of district judges.
And it seems that the administration in Washington, D.C. was impressed with you by virtue of the fact that you were brought onto various committees early on. Do you feel that that was because of your uniqueness?
I really have no idea. I just felt very fortunate to be asked to serve on committees, administrative committees, to be able to teach. And I don't really know how it started. I just was glad that it did. Being from a small court, it really gave me an opportunity to really widen my colleagues, and instead of having just one or two district judges and no magistrate judges as colleagues, I ended up with 500 magistrate judge colleagues, and have met many district judges, through my work on the judicial conference committees and through the FJC as well. So I feel like my court broadened out to become the entire federal court system.
What did you find the most rewarding part or joyful part of your job?
I found the most satisfaction out of helping parties to reach settlement. Tackling a complex legal issue on a motion, was intellectually challenging, but nothing felt quite as satisfying as having parties write me a note after a mediation and thank me for what they'd done, or give me a hug on their way out of a mediation. And there's one incident I particularly remember. It was a diversity of citizenship case, a wrongful death case, and there was a young mother who was killed in an accident with a large semi-truck. And she had two of her small children in the car with her. She had picked one of them up from preschool and had taken the baby with her to pick up the other child. The children were badly injured and she was killed. And her husband came to the mediation, and I noticed in front of him on the table was a book of photographs that were taken in the days before, all our photos were digital and on our iPhones. But when I sat down with him and his lawyer alone, I said, I see that you've brought a photo album with me. Is there something you'd like to show me? And we spent the next hour and a half looking at photos of his wedding, the birth of their children, their Christmases, their birthday parties, finally his wife's funeral, and the children in the hospital. It was wrenching. And ultimately, I slowly moved the conversation around to the loss of his wife and how we were going to get his case resolved and what a settlement could do for him in helping him financially to get the financial stability to raise his children. And we got his case resolved. He sent me a thank you note afterward. And years later, probably 15 years later, I got a phone call out of the blue. I had already retired. He must have found my number on the internet. He called me and asked me if I remembered the mediation and said his daughter, one of the children who was in the accident, wanted to go to law school, and would I be willing to meet with her to talk to her about it? It was very touching.
Did you meet with her?
I did. I met with her twice, and then we texted back and forth for quite some time. And I just think nothing can be more rewarding than that kind of experience.
Well, my next question was going to be, was there a particular case or type of case that you're proud of for your involvement? But you may have already answered that. Are there any other types of cases you're particularly pleased with or proud of?
Well, there are. I mean, there's nothing that's touched me as much as that kind of experience that I just explained. But I remember a particularly challenging case really early in my career as a magistrate judge. And it involved the survival of a really large synthetic fuels plant that was a major employer in the western part of my state. And so several hundred jobs were on the line, and this plant was either going to be shuttered or it was going to thrive, depending on the outcome of this litigation. And so I met with a huge group of lawyers and business people 7 or 8 times. They would come to Fargo. I once went to Washington because we had to involve the Department of Energy. And ultimately, the case settled for just over $500 million, plus a commitment by the defendants, who were energy companies, to buy the entire output of that plant for a 15-year period, which guaranteed its survival for at least 15 more years and guaranteed the jobs of all of those families for all those years to come. So even though it didn't have the emotional pull at my heartstrings like the wrongful death case I described, I felt it was very important to my state, and I felt a great sense of accomplishment.
Looking back, how would you describe your judicial career?
It couldn't have been more rewarding. I really appreciated having the opportunity to shape people's futures by the decisions I made or by the mediation sessions that I held. And I came close in the late 90s to an appointment to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals. I was one of 2 finalists. I'd been led to believe that I was going to get the appointment, and someone more political got it. And then in the early 2000s, I was again one of 2 finalists for the district judgeship. And I was led to believe I was going to get it. And again, someone more political than I was got it. And later I looked back and thought how fortunate I was that I didn't get either of those positions, because I don't think either of them would have suited me as well as being a magistrate judge. I really liked the range of duties. I liked the opportunities that came with it, internationally and nationally, both with the Judicial Conference and the Federal Judicial Center and our Judges Association. I don't think I would have had the time to do those if I had taken on another judgeship. And I really thought I was maybe more motivated about getting those positions than I would have been about having them. And I'm very thankful that I got to serve 30 years as a magistrate judge.
Good for you. What advice would you have for new and current magistrate judges?
I think just appreciate every day. Take a moment every day to be thankful that you have that wonderful job and how you can be of service to the litigants, to the people of your district, and to the people of the United States by serving in really such a unique and important position.
Do you have any anecdotes you want to share with us?
I do have one. When I clerked for the federal district judge in my district, he was the chief judge, Paul Benson. Judge Benson was the epitome of what, in those days, we all thought a judge should look like. He was, of course, a white male, had a beautiful shock of white hair. He looked very stern, very erect. He could really command the presence of a courtroom or anywhere he went. And that was really what I thought a judge looked like when I was a child. And it turned out that I served as a clerk for the judge that seemed like a stereotypical judge to me. But after I served on the court for just a few years, my son was about 4 years old. I had him up at my chambers to, I think he was there because I was taking him to a doctor appointment later in the day. And so we gave him paper and markers, and we let him make a copy of his little picture that he drew on the copy machine. And he just thought it was so much fun to be in chambers. And so he just looked up at me and said, "Mommy, can boys be judges too?" And I thought, wow, what a different perspective he has about judges than I had when I was a child. And it made me feel really good.
And it should. Congratulations. You've had a wonderful career, and you've got a wonderful career ahead of you in your mediation practice, and certainly your passion for education is going to lead you in all sorts of new directions. I thank you for sharing with all of us for this oral history.
Thank you. Thank you, Louisa, for interviewing me and for your friendship over the years.